Normally I get up here and introduce the speaker, so this is a new experience for me. I want to appreciate everybody being here, and could I ask if you turn your cell phones and electronic devices off? In 2009, Kathryn Stockett's book, The Help, featured some African-American maids in Jackson, Mississippi, who worked in white homes during the early 1960s. Stockett's book was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 100 weeks, and Octavia Spencer was named Best Supporting Actress in a 2011 film adaptation. There are many powerful moments in both the book and the film, but none more dramatic than the white woman eating chocolate pie made by one of the maids. I'm glad you know the story. I don't have to explain it. But this chocolate pie included an added ingredient, becoming in itself a powerful civil rights protest symbol. The civil rights movement was marked with a variety of public protests, including but not limited to marches, sit-ins, demonstrations, and boycotts. In 26 days, Little Rock and Arkansas will commemorate the 60th anniversary of the 1957 desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. Just days ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, we saw scenes all too familiar to those here 60 years ago. In fact, in the foreword to Daisy Bates' book, The Long Shadow of Little Rock, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, quote, "The mobs were on the march." And indeed, they were. In 1997, I worked alongside several community leaders, including my friend, civil rights activist and historian Annie Abrams, on Central's 40th anniversary commemoration, the one attended by President Clinton, Governor Mike Huckabee, and Mayor Jim Daley, the one where the president, the governor, and the mayor held open the front doors of Central High for the Little Rock Nine to walk through, the one where the school's talented student body president, Fatima McKendra, was front and center on the national stage. I hoped as a result of the 1997 events that people from all perspectives involved in the 57 crisis would tell their stories, document their history, preserve their records, and write their books. Over the past 20 years, a significant amount of that has happened. Thanks to legislation championed by Senator Dale Bumpers, strongly supported by Senator Tim Hutchinson and Congressman Vic Snyder, and signed by President Clinton, Little Rock Central High School is now Little Rock Central National Historic Site, annually drawing visitors from all over the state, the country, and the world, many of whom make their way up Central's famous front steps. A few days ago, I went to the Central Museum, where I spent time looking at the collection of books and films that have been written and produced since 1997, including first-person accounts written by some of the Little Rock Nine. In 1998, thanks in large part to the late Irene Gaston Samuel, the names of the Women's Emergency Committee to open our schools, the courageous group of women who met secretly and were led by Adolphine Fletcher Terry, those names were released and published for the first time. I might note that devoted Clinton School volunteer Pat Youngdahl was a member of that group, and her name, like all the others, is inscribed on glass panels in the conservatory at the Terry Mansion, Mrs. Terry's home where the WEC convened. So, we have made progress in the preservation, recording, and publishing of Little Rock's civil rights. But there remain many untold and undocumented accounts. There are attics still full of valuable materials. Several months ago, Annie Abrams and I were back on the Central Campus, and she asked me a question. Do you want to know the Arkansas version of The Help? There's an Arkansas version, I asked. Sure is, she said. Sit down over here and let me tell you a story. Storytelling is a powerful form of communication and has kept history alive from generation to generation, particularly when there was not access to recording equipment, little funding for publishing, when history books were not at all fair and balanced, when African American heritage was not considered Southern heritage, but perhaps most noteworthy of all, many of these stories couldn't be shared publicly because of fear. Today's story is one that had to wait on time. But after hearing it, I began to study and research to help place it in an even more public context. According to a 2006 UA Little Rock report, down by the riverside, in the early 1900s, there was an African American neighborhood called West Rock. It was located in the area what is now around Cantrell and Rebsamen Park roads. Many who lived there over the years worked for white residents at homes in the neighborhoods at the top of Cantrell Hill. We live in one of those neighborhoods. In 1947, the Riverdale Country Club was built north of West Rock. By 1949, according to the UA Little Rock study, pressure was mounting on city leaders to clear out West Rock because members, golfers, and guests had to pass it on their way to the country club. In the 1950s, the West Rock Urban Renewal Project tore down or moved some 90 homes occupied by African American families. Based on information in the Carl Bailey papers in the UA archives at the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, by November 1947, the Riverdale Country Club had 350 members and a waiting list. Its members included many of Little Rock's prominent white citizens. The dining room opened on December 4th, 1947. According to the 1959 Riverdale Club Handbook from the Willie Oates collection, also at the Butler Center, the manager had the responsibility of selecting the employees of the dining room and the kitchen. Most of the kitchen, dining room, bar, and custodial staff were African American. Some may have even lived at West Rock before urban renewal. After the Brown v. Board of Education 1954 Supreme Court decision, and after plans were made to integrate the Little Rock Public Schools, racial tensions in the city heightened and segregationist activities increased. Governor Orville Faubus emerged as a well-known and powerful figure because of his opposition to integration. Some of the male Riverdale Club members were active Faubus backers and supporters. Many dinner meetings during the 1955 to 59 period were held at Riverdale to discuss strategies, advise the governor, and generate support for his policies. Sometimes the governor and other invited guests joined club members. Sometimes only male club members were present. Many of the men who ate at these gatherings ordered steaks that were served by African American employees. Orville Abrams, Annie's late husband, was a waiter and bartender at Riverdale for many years. He often told Annie stories about his work there. On our visit to Central, Annie shared the one about the Arkansas version of The Help with me. Annie's here today, and she gave me permission to tell Orville's story after 60 years, much like it took 40 years to convince Irene to release the names of the Women's Emergency Committee. Just as a surprise ingredient was added to the chocolate pie in Jackson, there was a surprise addition to the steaks in Little Rock. After the steaks were cooked and before they were delivered to the table, some of the male hip would rub their private areas over the tops of the steaks in an unrecognizable protest. Some of the staff not only then watched the men eat, but would pick up the plates and ask them how they enjoyed their meals. Riverdale Country Club moved further west in 1968, becoming Pleasant Valley Country Club. Some of the city's most popular restaurants are now located in what was West Rock, and Riverdale is now Little Rock's premier public golf course. I don't know who ate the swabbed steaks. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that Orville Abrams told Annie about it some 60 years ago, and she has now courageously shared it. Encompassed in a setting of racial politics, violence, and urban renewal, it is today part of the Little Rock story. It also happened about 50 years before the film Waiting, which at the time was a funny look at some of the behind-the-scenes activities in a restaurant. But what happened at Riverdale in the 1950s was not at all meant to be funny. It was a response to power, privilege, and oppression. Now, I sincerely hope I haven't discouraged anyone from eating steaks. But I also hope that historians and scholars will discover more previously untold protests, including as experienced in Jackson and in Little Rock, the, quote, added ingredients, quote, of the civil rights movement. I hope more African Americans will share their civil rights stories that have been told and passed down for years around dinner tables, on front porches, and at family reunions. That would certainly be one significant outcome from Central's 60th anniversary commemoration. Annie Abrams has served on every one of the Central High anniversary commissions. She's in the Arkansas Black Hall of Fame. Her accomplishments and awards are many. Her home is like walking through a history museum, and she's never been without a worthy project or cause. Today, she just gave a great gift to history, and I am honored to help share it. Please join me in greeting Annie Abrams.
That's my beloved husband. 10 years of working at Riverdale, Charlie Brown's Steakhouse, Marion Hotel, and I can look at all this gray hair, and you remember when those waiters would come in with those trays, and there they would make this sound like elephants coming in the room. Some of y'all don't want nobody to know you're that old. But Abram was one of those waiters at the Marion Hotel where the real power brokers used to eat. But today, I want to make sure you know I'm a history maker. For those that don't believe what I'm going to say, come on up. This is a new little baby I adopted. He's graduating from UCA. And so Jonathan is driving me today. You know, I have a Coupe de Ville Cadillac that my CPA son decided Mother's Day to give me that had 30,000 miles on it. Hell, I can't drive that sucker and park it. So it's parked in my backyard unless somebody decides they'll drive it. But this baby said, no, I just drive my car. I brought my husband's funeral programs, and so if you don't believe Skip, I brought my professional profile that I used when they asked me to get in the Black Hall of Fame. There's nothing decent in Arkansas that they haven't asked me to be a servant. Now, if you call my house for the last 20 years, this is what you heard. Service is the rent you pay to stay on this earth. I'm going to pay some rent. Have you paid any rent? I don't plan to be evicted from heaven and go to hell. The story that's so important, as you say, my house is a museum. I remember a reporter was there from the New York Times, and he lied and said I had so many books the shelves was, swagging. I guess he had to do that to keep his job because he'd never seen that many books in an African-American home. I have over 2,000 funeral programs of all of y'all that ain't in it yet. And I also have all of the papers that were coming out that had something to do with civil rights, either in the basement, up in my attic, or in the one now that's called the public-private museum that people come to all the time. And all of y'all are welcome. Just don't come at the same time. But the connection is between Orville Forbes and Orville Abrams. Orville Forbes got to be a person that I knew just as well as I know Skip through my husband. I got to know Orville's wife because of my relationship with Liza Ashley. And I know how they shared the pain. Orville with my husband and Alda with Liza. And those books are out there. But to drop the background so that I say, this one is autographed. How many of y'all got that in your library? This one is autographed. Orville Forbes himself. And his side of what he experienced is in this book. Now, I may use it one day for fundraising and get an auctioning off of it. But the last time I talked to Mr. Forbes, it was a sad time for me, for him, because I got to know him through my husband, and I got to know his wife through his very close friend, Liza. I want you to tell your wife that I've got a new project. All the first ladies that knew Liza asked me to help her get back so that she can die in Little Rock, Arkansas. She's out there where her son took her. Now he's had a heart attack and a stroke, and so he can't see about her. So the first ladies that stayed over there in that mansion that public housing, you know I call it public housing, that stayed in that public housing, they knew her. Their children knew her. And I decided, I think y'all better try to help me get her back here. Tell your wife when you get home. I'm talking to Jim Guy. When I got to know both of them, and I also know all of the Little Rock Nine and their parents, because we were all in the same community. But I also got to know how the parents of Orville Forbes' child, who was over there. Classism is worse than racism. And in Little Rock, it's the thing that divides us, elitism. And it has nothing to do with color. We have it in the black community, you have it in the European community. Even I have discovered with the Asian community that I'm interacting with, and the Hispanic. Elitism is what's dividing them. The haves and the have-nots is the new word that they talk about. You used to be one of them haves in the black community. Yeah, your husband made y'all be one. I'm talking Dr. Miller's wife, widow. But one of the things that the last time I talked to Mr. Forbes, I called him and I said, Mr. Forbes, I said, this is Annie Abrams, your namesake. That's the relationship they had between them. They called each other namesake. Orville called Orville namesake. And I said, this is your namesake's wife. And I said, how you doing? He said, I'm just doing. He was lonely up there. I said, you know, when George Wallace almost got assassinated, he had a second chance and was redeemed in his racial identity. He got to be the best friend with the educational community when he had been one of the ones that, you know, that history. And so he said, what you mean? I said, well, you know, I've been with everything that's related to civil rights since I was 16 years old with Mr. Jeffrey Hawkins. I said, and so I'm the chair of Jesse Jackson's campaign here in the 2nd Congressional District. And would you like to change your legacy from 1957 to 1984? He said, yeah, Annie. How would I do it? I said, well, if you want to come and endorse Jesse Jackson, that would change everything for you. He said, well, how would I do that? I said, well, he's going to be at the hotel, and B.J. Sams is the reporter that's going to be there covering it, and it'll go all over the world. B.J. was just like Skip, couldn't wait. Oh, God, I'm going to get this story. You know how them journalists are. So he said, okay. He said, but my old truck won't get down to Little Rock. When do I need to be there? I said, well, let me see. Let me see what I can do. So I called my affirmative action black out there at UPS at that time and told him what my need was. He said, Annie, you can ask more things. I said, yeah, but we help get you out there as a first in UPS at the office up there. He said, okay, what is it? I said, I need you to see if y'all could bring Mr. Forbes down to be there and endorse Jesse Jackson. He said, oh, shit. He said, all right, I'll see what I can do. So he made the arrangement. And so I called Mr. Forbes back and told him, I said, I got you a ride if you can get over there to the UPS place. And he said, okay. Bless his heart, he was so excited about that second chance for his legacy. Had a flat in that old truck. He didn't have that car that he used to have that everybody wanted. And wouldn't nobody help him get over there. He called me and he said, I got to get there. I want to get there. I said, well, let me call him and tell him that you're going to be late. And he said, I couldn't call back out there to their headquarters. I called the man. He told me his name and everything that I'd have to give to him so he would know who it is. And he said, well, we can't wait on him because they don't allow us to be late. And you know, UPS is very systemically on time for their systems. So I had to tell him, they said, they can't wait on you. And I can still hear his voice of tears. I couldn't get him here because I got a ride with Jesse Jackson to come to Little Rock on a corporate plane. And so I told B.J. Sams, who's retired now, I'm surprised he's not here, so he could be a witness and he could tell part of this. That was the chance for the man I got to know that told me about what it meant about elitism and how his son was treated almost as badly as the Little Rock Nine based on race and color of their skin. You remember seeing some of the articles about Pharaoh's troubles over there. And so one of the things that he told Abrams was, he said, one of the things that made me make the decision, when I recognized how they were treating my child, because he was a hillbilly, and Little Rock wouldn't accept hillbillies in their elitism. And so when I think about anybody's child, and you saw Chelsea have to talk about the child that the same journalism was talking about number 45's child, when they're going to dress him to be a child in the White House. Same thing that happened to Truman's child, Margaret. You remember how they used to talk about her? Well, that humanity is what motivates me, and has always motivated me. I was in Geneva at a UN conference representing the worldwide WCA for a conference on institutional racism and apartheid. And I was there for 3 weeks. And at that same time, Mandela was in prison. And so when you think in terms of children, I was at the first Martin Luther King national holiday. And that little boy, Bill Clinton, had come to do a bon voyage for us to take these children to the first Martin Luther King national holiday. Arkansas was one of those that would not pass that legislation. And when we got there, 2 stops on the way there, I'll never forget. And that was the one when we got there to stop by to see the church where those 5 little girls were blown up on a Sunday. Stopped at the McDonald's with these 22 children that I had taken to be there. He came out and found out where we were going and what we were doing. And he told me I was the first white person to get there and see those bodies in that church. And he said, you don't owe me nothing. And he fed 22 children and 7 chaperones for his contribution to make a difference, because he still bore the pattern of what it means to see children blown up based on hate.
You got to go to questions, okay?
You go, yeah.
No, you got to step here. We got to open it up for questions.
Oh, okay. But let me tell you 2 other things.
All right.
The waiters, which my husband belonged to, were at the Marion, as I told you, and at Charlie Brown, but it was at Riverdale when he introduced that sauce that was there. Black men today are still being told that they are not first class, but they were with the first class. 50 for the future. I've got the list of all the 50 for the future in my library, which was all white men. That's the group that was sitting there making the decision about desegregation in Little Rock. And they had many meetings, and Abrams said, first they'd have a meeting, they'd have a meeting for the first group, which would be the liberals, and then the segregations would come to Riverdale to have their meeting. And so the waiters, having to listen to all of the ugly, ugly things that they would say about them, back in the kitchen, they decided, the 50 for the future leaders and the people who own the properties the buildings are named after, Donaghy's and so forth, those men knew them. So those waiters were a team of folks that they understood what it meant to be a black man and have to grin and be polite and civil when people are talking about you. It's ironic, Skip, today, that he told me one I didn't tell you. You know, you can't tell Skip everything because he'll go tell it. It was the same thing that
my goal is to get you up here to tell it.
Well, you got it. The thing what he told me second to the steak swipping was the day that the powerful Razorback Booster Club was meeting out there. And they didn't have any blacks on the Razorback team back then. And they were talking about, Arkansas got the win. Ain't that what they talking about tonight? They got the win. Well, that's what they were mad at him, Frank, because the team wasn't, and they told him, you got to get us some niggers on this team, because the ones that's beating the hell out of us got some niggers on it. And he said, I ain't getting none. I'm gonna make these win for me. And those same powerful folks that were members of the 50 for the Future, Rotary Club 99, the Dukes had to stand and listen to that. So, be careful. People that you step on is called oppression and suppression. They may not can say nothing by law, not even march. Back in them days, men couldn't march. But they were some of the same men that had to go over to the VA and be segregated. And Abram was one of those who was in World War II like you. They had to be over there and segregated. And I had the opportunity to be a little girl at Dunbar, having a chance to go volunteer on Valentine's Day to serve those veterans. But one of the most painful ones and scariest ones was one Valentine night we was over there, and we were passing out all of these cookies and everything that represented Valentine. And this big white man, about like you, baby, you know, we belong to this, stand up, you, he know who I'm talking about. He was about like that. And he hollered and said, take them blood things away from him. He had a flashback that those red gumdrops were blobs of blood. He was in the VA because of fighting for us to be free enough to sit here. And so I have a feeling for veterans. I have a respect for waiters. I have a respect for women waitresses, because I've been one and I could definitely Rex. When I went there glad to get a job in the summer to wash dishes, and I ended up being the cashier at Mr. Whipple's Riverdale type restaurant. Got it? You got the picture? Okay. Everybody, Google me for the rest of the story.
We're going to have some questions. Okay. This is why it's important that stories like this be told. And I hope Her example will encourage others to tell it. Yeah, and she is right. I did want to tell the Razorback story, but I didn't. But she did, and I'm glad she did, and I hope she tells more. Now, does anyone have questions? Surely somebody's got.
If not, I can keep talking.
No. As I said, surely somebody has questions. Yes, there's a question. Yes, ma'am, we'll get the microphone.
Stand up. Stand up so he can get the mic.
Yeah.
How can we get the rest of the story?
At my house at the museum.
And
That was nobody. Listen, if you eating a steak and just somebody just did this across it, it tastes good. So keep on buying steaks. But just what Abram always told me, honey, whenever somebody is going to be in a serving role, tip them first. And you will get the service as if you were elite. And I did that when I took him. You know, my husband was an invalid for 30 years. I took him with me to board meeting when I was on the national board of the YWCA with Mary Rockefeller and Eunice Shriver. And I told the cab driver, I picked him out. I said, listen, my husband is here with me, and he's in a wheelchair, and I want you to take us so he can see some things that he never dreamed he could see. And so he said, okay. So I brought him down and brought my granddaughter, who would babysit him while I go to my board meeting in the hotel across from the Madison Square Garden. When I got down and got in there, I did what Abe did. I put a $50 bill in his hand, and I said, I'll pay you when we get back, whatever the meter says. He took us to everything that when you go to New York to see, he took us there. And when we got back to the hotel, I said, how much? Oh, he said, listen, when I saw the relationship you had with that man, I just hope God will send me a wife that would care as much as you do for him. And I didn't pay no more. He wouldn't accept anymore. And that's what I have been doing. And if you want some service, don't you send this back. This ain't done. Send this back. This is not right.
I'm not ever doing that.
Don't you do that.
All right, we got a question right over here. But wait for the microphone's coming. Hold on just a moment.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested in Orville Faubus's change of mind about segregation. I mean, from your talk, it sounds as if he changed his mind. And it's because his son, the hillbilly, was treated poorly. But when did that happen? I mean, how old was the son when the segregation problem happened?
The first time he began to have that change of heart, but he too had obligated him to Attorney Smith, who was his manager and his advisor. When you sell your souls, sometimes you can't buy it back. And he had sold his soul to those folks who used to be talking about him because he was poor and had tried to go to school, and they had called him a communist. Y'all remember that? And so he knew what it meant to be isolated, but he also knew he wanted opportunity. And that political opportunity was to take on that civil rights, Brown versus the Board of Education. That's when he did. And then the second was how his child was treated. And then the other one, his wife. You can't find no pictures where Elder Faubus was one of those that ran around with Willie Oates and others who were respected. So when you are rejected and you know you're being rejected for something you can't change, he couldn't change being a hillbilly. That's when he changed, when he had to in contact with elitism.
When Governor Faubus was named by Governor White as director of the Department of Veterans Administration, I was working for Senator Pryor at the time, and we were at an event, and Orville Faubus and David Pryor had a conversation, and it led to an event where, and they were bitter enemies. Governor talking about this, they were bitter political enemies, Young Turks versus Governor. Governor then David Pryor, then Senator Pryor, drove Orville Faubus alone to a American Legion event in Kensett, where the two of them, from Little Rock to Kensett, just talked. And that barrier broke down, even though they came from very fundamentally different views, and still, but when Orville Faubus was dying of cancer, very few people know this.
That's right.
When Orville Faubus was dying of cancer, David Pryor drove him to UAMS for his cancer treatments.
That's right.
Yeah. So Annie believes in reconciliation, and so do I.
That's right.
All right, other questions? Yes, Carney Dietz has a question.
I don't have a question, just a statement. I was a member of Riverdale Country Club, but I was glad I didn't join until 62.
When I did the research, I looked for your name on the roster. It was not there.
That's a historical status. I think the one thing that I want you to do is, at 85, born 1931, September the 25th, one of the highlights of my life was to be in Albany and be able to sit in the wheelchair of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Because that's the man that turned the financial situation in my country upside down through a stimulus program, included the WPA, the CCC, and my daddy was lost on his way to try to get a part to work in the CC camp, which they're the ones that build most of our Arkansas parks. And then I was so glad that I had come this far that in the Robinson Auditorium that was built by the WPA folks, I sang my first solo at my 50th graduation, summertime. I'm not gonna sing it.
Okay, got any other questions? Come on, anybody got more? We got one at the back. Stacy, hold on, wait for the microphone back there. Stacy, that's Stacy.
I loved your daddy more than you loved him. That Bob, I cried when he left us. Good to see you, Stacy.
When I was at Hendrix in 1978 to 82, there was a very, very small population of African American students. And one night, 3 white students and 3 African American students, we got together in Galloway Hall in the parlor, and we began to have some discussions about how we were going to work together, whether or not we needed to put pressure on the institution or at the time the dean of admission, that we needed to have more diversity on the Hendrix campus. And that discussion resulted in more. And the stories that y'all are telling today reminded me of a girl that was in this group of 6 of us. Her name was Sharon Stamps. And I don't know if anybody in this room even knows Sharon or knows where she is, but I won't forget what she said that day. And one of the white guys looked at her and he said, you sound so angry tonight, Sharon. I haven't done anything to you. And Sharon said, no, you haven't. But I know what your mother did to my mother, and I know what your grandmother did to my grandmother, because I've heard those stories all my life. And when you hear that, I was 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, and I understand the definition of maybe deep-seated hostility. When people take out after your family, no matter if they're your children or they're your grandmother, that's personal.
So, okay, we got to go.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I didn't bring enough paper for everybody, but I'll bring some so they'll be here for the next one. But I write an article in the Arkansas Talk. In that book, I talk about the Constitution.
The good thing about Annie is that she had the courage today to get up here and tell those stories. The other good thing about her is that she has preserved and protected history. It is up to every one of us on this 60th anniversary commemoration. And there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. But those that were there in 1957 and those that remember the stories, those days, time is moving on. And we have got to capture those stories. And my friends at the Butler Center have done a terrific job in building a great collection. And I hope all of you will help be a part of going to the people that you know, going to the people that you worked with, going to the people and the stories that you've heard, and particularly for the African Americans here who had no voice, who had no opportunity to tell, who weren't covered in the newspapers, who the televisions didn't film, who didn't listen to the stories and didn't put them in the books, that were passed down at family reunions and dinner tables and front porches. Let's tell those stories. Let's let America and the world know about it. Thank you, Annie Abrams. Thank you all for coming.